Hi guys, so today I am doing what I think is my third book versus film showdown. I group them together, so sometimes it's book versus TV showdown, sometimes it's book versus film showdown, but they're like part of the same like series, if you will. I think this is the third one, it could possibly be the fourth one, but I feel like it's the third one. Anyway, today's one is on The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman, which was adapted into the movie, which my friend Maria kindly let me borrow both of these. She gave this to me in the end, but I need to give this one back to her. So I am going to start off with what I devoured first, and that, as usual, as most times is the case, was the novel. So just a brief summary overview of the sort of concept in general of what this story is about. So we're following two characters, Tom and Izzy, and basically they live on a very remote island in Australia, looking after a lighthouse. So it's a very kind of isolated environment for them. It's just the two of them. They only really see other people every like 3 to 6 months, I think, when a boat comes in to give them like extra goods and stuff to, you know, survive off of, like little extra bits and bobs, letters from home, that sort of stuff, updates about the world outside. Other than that, it's just the two of them. There has been a bit of traumatic instances on the island that leaves them rather heartbroken. And then one day a really strange random event happens and a boat is washed up. They feel like they can hear a baby crying, so they go and investigate. They kind of need to do that anyway, because for Tom's job as a lighthouse keeper, he has to log everything that happens on the island. So he goes to investigate with Izzy what this crying noise is, what's happening out in sea, and it's a boat that's washed up, and inside the boat is a live baby crying beside a dead body of a man. And so obviously this brings up a whole can of worms, like how did they get here, how is this baby alive, what is the circumstance, who's looking for these people, like what's happened. And they make a decision that changes the course of their lives, for better and for worse, some might say. So that's that there. I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler free as possible. If I feel like there is going to be some spoilers, I'll try and let guys know in advance, but I'd say most definitely watch this if you have read both the book and the movie, or vice versa. You know, you've kind of got a gist of the story generally if you've read or watched one or the other, if you know what I mean. So yes, starting with the novel first, I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. I felt like in terms of writing, it took me a little while to get invested in the storytelling and the writing. I think it got until like part 2 before I was like fully invested in what was happening. I'd say I was pretty hooked from the prologue, but then when we got into like the actual storytelling, it was like in the past leading up to the circumstances now, if that makes sense. So the prologue is kind of like a snippet of what's to come. So it did take me back a little bit, quite literally, because we were reading from like past perspective. When we got into the main bulk, and we kind of had to slowly build up to what was happening in the prologue, if you know what I mean. So that sort of threw me out a little bit, but as I said, after like part 2, I was fully invested in it. I'd say it worked really well in giving you, I don't know how to describe this. Basically, you come to grow with these characters, and because you're following them over a period of time, like years, you can kind of see how their thought process works. It makes you think, well, personally it made me think my right and wrong was a bit squiffy because of like sympathising with how they went about things in this. I loved the fact that when it did build up to the inevitable, we wasn't sort of rushed over the consequences. We saw what was happening after the fact, which I feel is needed, because sometimes when you get to that sort of dramatic episode of a book, it sort of briefly goes over it, and I don't think that's really fair, because you've invested your time learning about these characters. You want to know what happens after, and you want to know how it's dealt with, how it affects them personally, like physically and mentally. So I appreciated that aspect. In terms of Tom and Izzy, Tom was very quiet, very to himself. Izzy was more bold and out there in terms of like dynamics and contrasts between the couple. I do feel like Izzy was very childish. She is much younger than Tom, and I feel like she was very childish sometimes in the way she'd respond and try to get information out of him. Yeah, they're a couple and they should try and tell each other as much as possible, but the backstory of Tom is that he's just come from war, and there's things that he can't mentally process that he saw, and Izzy's trying to get that out of him, I feel sometimes unfairly, and she kind of goes in a little bit of a strop when he is closed off to her, because one, he's even said he doesn't think that she should hear those horrors, he doesn't want to inflict that on anybody, and two, he's struggling to deal with those horrors himself. So yeah, I will say though, I understand her frustrated outbursts at times because of her personal history and what she's gone through, but at the same time it's almost like you're different people. You met him being closed off, he met you being bold, just kind of agree to disagree on that sort of thing. He's not ever going to tell you everything what's in his mind because he can't physically speak those words, and she's not ever going to stop kind of nagging at him to do so, you know what I mean? It's just that. Overall though, for the book itself, I would say it was such a beautiful story. I'm so glad that I managed to get into it, and after like years of owning it, I loved it, I really enjoyed it, and I was excited to jump onto the film. So the film is a quicker review, just because it was more like picking out a few things that were different or stuck out to me in terms of the book. So the film, I would say I gave 4 stars as well. I would say there's a particular scene at the beginning where in the book it builds up kind of some character arcs, a little bit of building of the plot and stuff, and it's a particular scene on a ship. I won't go into any more detail, but in the film it skips over that, and I feel like for me personally that, even though I didn't mention it in my review here, it's something I wanted to crop up here in this part. It's a crucial moment that kind of shows you Tom's character, people that you meet throughout the story. It kind of leads to connections and stuff, and I felt like because it missed that part out, you lost some of the connection, some of the flow, and I don't know, just something was left out because of scenes like that being removed, or not being thought as good enough to put in here, I guess. I feel like in terms of the romance between Tom and Izzy, it did sort of skip over that a little bit as well. Like the budding of the romance wasn't as well fleshed out. You didn't see them sort of slowly falling in love with each other. It just felt a little bit rushed. Cinematically it looked good, like the scenes that they had sort of patching together as they were meeting and stuff like that was lovely and beautiful, but again it just lacked the softness of actually seeing things slowly, naturally develop, you know? I feel like in the book it did it a little bit better because it made it feel a little bit more legit. I think it did in most cases throw at you the emotion and the flow that the book had, but it also did feel a little bit awkward in times of pacing, just a little bit sort of, that's the end of that bit, let's move on to this bit, whereas the book flowed a little bit more naturally. But other than that, I felt like this was really good storytelling too. I feel like it did generally overall translate well into like film, and I would totally recommend it. Even if you have no interest in reading the book, I would check out the film still too. I would say though, the book for me personally, it just has that little bit more oomph, that little bit more connection and flow and extra content just generally than the movie had, which is generally the case because obviously you've got less time, I guess, to squeeze stuff in here. You've got to keep your attention for longer for a wider range of people, whereas in a book I feel like it's more cultivated to particular people, you know what I mean? Like you want to spend that time reading because I just feel like that's a thing. But yeah, I would say even though they both got the same rating, I preferred the book just a little bit more than the film, but it's still a very good interpretation of the novel. So let me know what you guys thought of the film and the book, or one or the other if you haven't seen or read both. And yeah, I'll speak to you in another video soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.